Hey, welcome back everyone to the Progressive Brothers Podcast. This is episode 87. I'm here with my co-host, Renaissance Man.
Welcome back everyone. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, and peace to everybody in the chat.
Also, make sure you follow us on Twitter at brothers_podcasts. So finally, the infrastructure bill passes at 1.7 trillion, down from the 6.5 to 7 trillion that it was first initially proposed at. And with all the fighting and all the back and forth and all the battling within the party and outside the party, they now have a actual functional bill, something that they can hang their hat on. What's your take on this, Renaissance Man, as it has been announced today?
First thought is I think the reason why this got passed was I think some Dems freaked out about Virginia and New Jersey. I believe it was Mark Warner who was saying that he thought that if this was passed maybe before, that this could have helped Terry McAuliffe possibly win. So I think unfortunately is a little bit of pressure that they're feeling, in the sense that I think some of that narrative of, hey, progressives, y'all holding up the bill, I think some of that caught on. But on the other side, I also think possibly maybe the message is also getting through that, hey, Dems they're going to have to run on something. You're not going to be able to just run on Trump, because obviously Trump is not there, or you're not going to be able to just run on pointing the finger. For the actual bill itself, I take sort of a wait and see approach. I mean, don't get me wrong, infrastructure is good. We've needed an infrastructure bill. It is a win in my opinion, because Trump ran on infrastructure. He failed to get it passed. Obama tossed the idea of infrastructure around, could never really get consensus, bipartisans, and consensus needed to pass it. So, I think from that perspective, I think it's definitely a good thing. As far as what's in the bill, money for lead pipes coming out of the ground. So places that come to mind, places like Jackson, Mississippi has had some issue with the water. Is obviously Flint, Michigan as well, more high profile. So things like that I think are a big plus. Money for railroads. Specifically, I saw something for Amtrak, which I believe will be the largest allotment to Amtrak that they've gotten since they've been founded. So while I initially said, disappointed that there's no high-speed rail, at least seeing that there is some push to have some alternative to cars on the road, even though it is infrastructure bill, improve that, the rail infrastructure. The big thing I think that's going to be the win for rural America, even though I don't think they really know it, is broadband. During COVID, you had basically school buses that were basically acting as hotspots. People would go park them in the middle of the county so kids could have Wi-Fi to get on and go to school. So those are just some of the things. Money for airports, stereotypical things. Same thing with like bridges, roads, which, I mean, don't get me wrong, we need it. But for me, it will be interesting to see what happens with regard to the social infrastructure bill, the additional I think it was originally 3 trillion. It sounds like they're around 1.7. How much of that is able to get passed? And progressives basically because they caved, did they give up all their leverage, or is there still political will to get this done?
Yeah, and it's interesting you bring up the point about the broadband aspect, because the broadband aspect can be done in quite a few ways. As long as there's power lines running up above, you can run broadband over those copper cables. So that's not that much of a big deal in terms of infrastructure. That's like the minimal piece. It doesn't require a whole lot of labor. It's more about it's more about execution and planning. Not so much about backhoes and other machinery and things like that. It doesn't really require a whole lot of that. You can run that with one or two companies, whether it's AT&T, Verizon, or Comcast, RCN, whatever they call themselves now. That can easily be done. Even be done with the the power and electric companies. As long as their electrical towers are up, they can run broadband right over those lines as is. It doesn't really require all that much. So from an infrastructure standpoint, that's like the minimum that they can get done. And so that was never going to be gutted out. However, the social programs that were very much necessary to get some of these underserved communities, more importantly, the Black community, on board, was gutted out. So the way how I'm looking at this now is that they agreed to this $1.7 trillion bill on both sides, and then the Build Back Better bill will come next, and those people will have to be on board for that. Now, how this plays out from last week with Virginia's insurrection at the ballot, the Dems are looking at this, the left is looking at this and saying, okay, we lost NBA, but we got this passed. I guess they're hoping that the infrastructure bill and the Build Back Better proposal and bill will somehow offset the loss in Virginia for what's going to happen in 2022.
Yeah, I think it's given them some. I think they're focused on something to run on, which, don't get me wrong, they definitely need it. But and two other things that I thought about that were in the bill that I missed too were EV stations. Money's in the bill to put in more EV stations across the country. So very much continuing on the trend of electric vehicles that you've seen under the Biden administration. So you have that, and then you have it was the buses, push for cities and municipalities to move towards either electric buses or zero emission or low emission type of buses. So you seeing things move in that direction as well. Now, in regards to the just to, like I said, the bill, Dems are going to have to go message this stuff. I was listening to a clip today, and it seems like a recurring issue, but Dems always have a messaging issue. They pass something like this, which, you had a majority of Democrats who voted for it in the House. Lots of Republicans voted against it. And actually some of the Republicans that did vote for it, they're actually catching heat from some people, Trumpsters in the party, who were very upset that Biden essentially got this win. And a lot of threats as far as primaries or going after them, purging the rhinos from the party. Those are being lobbied at them. But Dems are really going to have to get out and message this stuff, because I believe they're estimating this will create 2 million jobs over the next 10 years, something like that. So they're going to have to really take credit for these things and really make sure people know, because we had, for example, Mitch McConnell with the CARES Act. He voted against it, and here he is in his state campaigning on things that he helped bring back. You can't let them get away with stuff like that. You've got to be, like I said, just out messaging and saying, hey, this is what I did. And especially if you're able to pass the Build Back Better plan as well, they just got to really hit it, and the message got to be concise. They can't get bogged down in culture wars or, arguing about other things that the right wants to distract them from. They really got to stay on message with this stuff.
Yeah, but the thing here is this. The messaging has to be correct and it has to be accurate, but it also has to be just as visceral as the right. And I think that's where the left gets it wrong, where they're always putting on these big kitty gloves or not showing up at all with the response, because they're afraid of alienating that white middle suburban class base that may have not voted last time around but could potentially vote next time around. And I'm saying you gotta be on record that we're correcting the record for what it is, right? They're saying, well, CRT this and CRT that. You just gotta point them to the source. And when they say that CRT is being taught in schools, you have to be able to establish that history is not CRT. And you can't ban history just because you don't like the outcome of the story itself. And so they just have a complete messaging issue, and I feel like Black people are not center to the message delivery itself. There's always somebody that doesn't look like us that's delivering the message that keeps getting it wrong, and that's where the Democrats, the left, always runs into a brick wall, that they can't seem to understand that the people that they're trying to persuade don't really care about what they have to say at the time that it's being said, and that when Black people talk, they get a different message out. This is how they were able to corral and organize and galvanize the base in Georgia. It wasn't white voters or white Democratic strategists that led that charge. It was Stacey Abrams in the Fair Fight coalition that went out there and established the narrative. That's where the left gets it wrong. They're letting the wrong people inside their cabinet who look just like them go out there and spread a message that is always failing when they deliver it.
Oh, I think it's purposeful. If you're coming at it from that perspective, which I slightly disagree with, I'll start here first, I guess. I get the CRT that, hey, you have to correct the Republicans, but I think you can only correct them so much. For me, this is something I even struggle with, but you start to realize that a lot of people on the right don't vote on policy. A lot of people in general don't vote on policy, but I think specifically on the right, a lot of people don't vote on policy. They vote on either stories or they vote on fear. I think a lot of times on fear. So, like, the person who came up with the CRT strategy, his whole thing was, let me talk about this so we don't have to talk about policy, because if Republicans ever have to talk about policy, I mean, it's going to be like the Platinum Plan or Trump's healthcare plan. You're either not going to get anything, or if you do, it's going to be like a 2-page document. I mean, it's just they don't have many plans or policies in place. So that's their go-to, is fight culture wars to distract people from that. And I think where Dems make the mistake is they get so wrapped up in trying to correct them that they play into their hand. Like, there's nothing wrong with correcting them initially, but you can't let that be your only thing. Now, as far as the messaging goes, as far as people who are Black, I think that's purposeful. I think the Democratic Party has always sort of taken this stance of they don't want to be too aligned. I mean, everybody knows, Black folks vote for the Democratic Party at a 90% clip, but no one wants to. I think there is a real fear amongst Dems and the establishment of, we can have these people vote for us and we can even try to work with them on policy and things, but if we go out there and message too much that, hey, this is what the Black community got, they're afraid of a white lash, essentially, to use Van Jones' term. That they're afraid that sort of resentment is going to come. So I think it's almost a purposeful effort to try to downplay at least accomplishments to Black voters. It's more of a type of whisper. And then, hey, let's go and continue to try to pander to these moderate white, either suburban voters, or in some cases, even these working class voters that we somehow think are going to become Democrats that never seems to materialize.
Well, I guess the point that I was trying to make was that if they actually engage the base on the ground, it's better than not engaging them at all. And I think that's what I'm saying. The left gets it wrong, right? They'll go on CNN or MSNBC and talk about, well, what CRT is, from a media standpoint, but they're not going on the ground and actually talking to that demographic of people who don't understand what's going on.
Okay.
And that's what I'm saying. Like, Biden needs to go to West Virginia. He needs to point out that West Virginia's system is crumbling, not because of CRT and not because of communism or socialism, but because it's dilapidated because of lack of leadership there. And that as Biden, I'm going to come here and actually help build 100 new clinics in West Virginia. I'm going to help get more clean water to West Virginia. See, Obama pulled this tactic when he went to Flint, Michigan, and he drank the water, right? Oh, this water's great. He engaged people on the ground where it mattered. This time around, they seem to not really understand that, or they lack the charisma to really deliver that message. And I think that's what I'm saying, that's where the problem is, that these white Democratic strategists always seem to get it wrong.
Kind of like the Clinton campaign.
Yeah, they the same exact thing, same exact problem. They seem to think that the white middle class voter is so important, and that they can somehow woo these people in by not being, by putting on kitty gloves or not touching them at all. And I'm saying, you got to get in their face on the ground. You can't say, well, this is critical race theory and it's taught in, PhD, master's degree programs at this level of post-secondary education. They don't want to hear that. You got to go on the ground and get in their face and let them know, if you care about, clean air, CRT is not your problem. If you care about, COVID vaccinations and things like that, CRT is not the problem. So you have to take that bullet out of the chamber so that they don't have anything else to fire with. And I think the Democrats get that part wrong all the time. And I think what I was referring to earlier, that Stacey Abrams and them got all of this correct, at least to an extent. They got it correct, that they went on the ground, they knocked on doors, they engaged the base, and was able to tip the scales in favor of Warnock and Ossoff. And so they wouldn't have been able to do that if they had not gotten on the ground. But the problem with Biden and the administration is that they're not going out there to look at the infrastructure for themselves and see how bad it is. LBJ went to West Virginia in the 60s and saw how bad it was, and that's how you came up with a food stamp program. And so they have to look at, historically, going on the ground and actually engaging in the demographics makes a lot of sense, and that's why LBJ was able to take West Virginia. So, if I remember correctly, but infrastructure wise, they have to have people that can look at the data points and say, okay, West Virginia, coal mine state, a lot of respiratory issues. Make the case for clean air, make the case for clean water, and make the case for digital transformation by broadband infrastructure development. Done. Keep it simple. Go in, bang, bang, boom, and be out of there. And then move on to Kentucky, move on to all of these red states, and actually engage that demographic on the ground. You're not losing anything right now by doing it. You're going to lose more in 2022 if you don't do it.
Yeah. I see what you're saying. You basically got to have a grassroots type of deal going on, and I think too, the Biden administration. I don't know if they're still in like COVID mode, like thinking like they're still on the campaign trail. Like Joe Biden can just do Zoom calls from his basement, like. That's the campaign mode that they were able to get him, get in, and have kind of been in that mode as well too. Not being out too much, just because of the pandemic. So I don't know if that's part of the issue as well. But I think another thing that they need to hit on, which I think is going to be sort of a maybe possibly an indirect benefit that people may not be thinking about as much. And that's in these rural areas is telehealth. When you start talking about having, broadband access and, then being able to do these things through, because I'm sure you don't have the best signal out there when it comes to a smartphone or things like that, people not having access to high-speed internet. A lot of these communities are struggling with rural hospitals and them closing. If you can get people, granted, it's going to take time, but if you can leverage technology through the broadband to start either doing telehealth, just things from home, doing things like that over like Zoom or something like that, or other platforms, or if you can even set up, sort of like rule many, not like more like health clinics where you can leverage that technology too. Maybe you have you may not even have a doctor on site necessarily. You may have like RN or something like that with LPNs exactly as well too. You know, with equipment there where they can do, you know, lab work and stuff, basic things like that, and then, you know, have a doctor telenetwork in, or even do it from their home. You know, to me, that's another area you can sort of tap into. And to me, if DIMS could really tap in and pull that lever, you know, to me that'd be a huge deal, because that's something that everybody can relate to. You know, everybody's got to go to the doctor. You know, everybody's got a relative or someone who's been sick at one point. You know, that's a big selling point. And to me, I hope it's something that doesn't get lost in all this, if it is something that they can really leverage to help some of these areas.
That's where the nonprofits come in. You know, the charitable foundations and whatnot come in and play that. They fill that vacuum. But in places like West Virginia, going back to West Virginia again, some of those places don't have running water. Some of those places don't have electricity 24 hours a day. And so that's the sort of, you know, hurdles that you're going to run into if you try to play that game, because you're talking to a demographic of people whose digital literacy is almost absent, for lack of a better description. And so when they run the census numbers, or when they do the canvassing on the ground, they have to take into consideration that people who have poor running water or lack of aqua infrastructure, electricity, broadband, those people tend to be undereducated and uneducated. And so asking them to engage in telehealth and these sort of things, like telehealth comes later after the infrastructure is in place, if that makes any sense. Because talking about telehealth now to someone who doesn't even have running water, it's you know, it's worlds apart. You know, it's almost like a moonshot to them, and so they can't really fathom that idea. A lot of people think like this on the ground in these sort of quote unquote rural areas, and so it's difficult to have that conversation. But once they see the benefits of infrastructure, then you can have that conversation as to what the infrastructure is going to deliver. Because if you say that telehealth can do this, and this for you, but there's no infrastructure to actually support it, then it doesn't really mean much at the end of the day. Those are my last thoughts.
No, very, very true. Very good point. Is you know, yeah, I was thinking more of just places that, not necessarily like West Virginia, but places that are just rural and don't have access. Versus, yeah, no, you're right. Definitely putting the cart before the horse, and places where you got, you know, that type of extreme sort of poverty. So, but like I said, we will see. Obviously, I believe if he hasn't already signed it, he's set to sign it in the next few days, and then obviously, I think the next thing will be people who are in positions, you know, to take advantage of some of this work that'll be coming down from federal contractors. You know, obviously we know some people in this space who will, I'm sure, be taking advantage of it, whether it's, you know, hauling loads or, you know, maybe even trying to bid on some construction work. So, you know, to me, that's the next step, is if you're someone who is who's either looking to get in that government contracting or trying to move in that direction, you know, especially if you're someone with a minority-owned firm, Black or minority-owned firm, you know, this is one of those times that's, like I said, it's a generational type of investment, at least on the infrastructure piece. So don't let it pass you by if that's what you're interested in.
Like, share, and subscribe. Make sure you follow us on Twitter at brothers_podcast.